This is my Unit 4.1 research methods PowerPoint, where I'll be looking at some of the ethical and legal issues that can occur within sport and exercise science research. So before we look into what ethical and legal issues are and what type of issues can occur, we should look at what life was like before the knowledge of these issues was around. So back in the times of the World Wars, the Nazis used to run concentration camps for prisoners and would actually conduct scientific experiments using the prisoners as their subjects. Now, obviously, this was done completely against the prisoner's will, and there was no form of consent uh, needed or thought about by the Nazis. So all of the experiments that were conducted were very cruel, and they all involved participants being either physically, psychologically, or socially harmed, and in some cases even caused some prisoners to die. So um, some of the types of experiments that the Nazis would carry out included an experiment known as the freezing experiment, where some of the subjects were submerged into different temperatures of water, including very cold and very hot water. And basically, the Nazis were trying to see what temperatures could cause a human to become unconscious. However, during these experiments, the prisoners would often die due to the extreme temperatures of the water. And there's so much wrong with these experiments in terms of ethical and legal issues, such as the fact that there was no consent given for the participants to take part, the participants were the subject to extreme harm, and also they had no right to withdraw. So, another example of the experiments carried out by the Nazis included the twins experiment, which involved the Nazis taking twins and injecting them with bacteria. And this would result in the twins dying, and then what would happen is the Nazis would force doctors to operate on their corpses. And one set of twins were apparently injected into they had an injection in their back, and this killed them, and then the doctors operated on them because the Nazis wanted to try and change their eye color. And again, like the previous experiment, there's so much wrong ethically and legally with these experiments. But due to there being no knowledge of the issues and there's no code of conduct for the researchers to follow, the experiments went ahead. So there are two very significant theorists that we need to look at when talking about the ethical and legal issues of sport and exercise science and the research within it. And these researchers are called Philip Zimbardo and Stanley Milgram. And so the first one we'll look at is the Stanford Prison Experiment, which was conducted by Zimbardo, and it took place in 1971 and involved young men being divided into two groups. One of the groups was prisoners, and the other of prison guards. And the men were put into a prison environment in the basement of Stanford University. And initially, the experiment was meant to last 2 weeks. However, due to the intensity of the experiment and the suffering that the prisoners went through because of the guards and their role, it was terminated after just 6 days. And basically, the conclusion that Zimbardo had was he believed that the guards acted the way they did and they inflicted all that pain onto the prisoners because they were inheriting their role. So they were taking up the role that they had been given, and they played their part. Now, obviously, this experiment will not be able to be replicated in today's guidelines about conducting research due to the huge amount of physical and psychological pain and harm that the participants suffered. And also due to the fact that the prisoners were not allowed to easily withdraw from the study, because what actually happened was Zimbardo made the people who wished to withdraw, he made them suffer extreme harassment from the guards, and this wouldn't be allowed in today's world because the participants must be allowed to easily withdraw from any experiment at any point, and that's even after the study is finished. So the Milgram study looked at the willingness to inflict pain on other people, and it was carried out in 1963, and it involved participants taking up the role of either a learner or a teacher. However, what the participants that volunteer didn't know was that the draw to find out who would have each role was actually fixed because the participants were all given the role of the teacher, and the learner was one of Milgram's co-workers. So the procedure included teachers being taken into a room that had an electric shock generator in it, and this would produce shocks that range from 15 volts, giving a light shock to the learners, all the way up to 450 volts, which could quite easily kill the learners. And the overall aim of the experiment was to see how far the teachers would go in obeying instructions if those instructions involved harming someone else. So after the study, Milgram found that 65% of the teachers continued giving electric shocks all the way up to the 450 volt shock, and that all of the participants, 100% of them, they all went to at least 300 volts. And so he concluded that ordinary people are likely to follow orders given to them by an authority figure because the command of inflicting the shock was given by someone who had more authority than the teachers. And so, yeah, he found that they are likely to follow orders given by an authority figure, even to the extent of killing an innocent human being. So, BASES stands for the British Association of Sport and Exercise Science, and it is the governing body for sport and exercise science in the UK. And it's critical for a researcher for many reasons, but mainly because BASES provides a code of conduct that the researchers must follow in order to for their study to be ethically and legally acceptable. And basically, the BASES tells you really what is right and wrong and what you can and can't do when researching and conducting experiments. So it's also a key organisation in sport science and allows researchers to be accredited if they fill the right needs, which include things like the right level of experience, qualification, and also competence. If a researcher is BASES accredited, then it looks very good for them and on their personal status, as it shows that they are a good and trustworthy researcher. So there are many different issues that can be found in a researcher's study, but these issues mainly fall into two categories, and these are ethical issues or legal issues. Now, ethical issues or ethics in general can be defined as the moral principles that govern a person's behaviour or the conducting of an activity. And it basically defines what's right and wrong when doing research. Legal issues, on the other hand, are when you don't work within the boundaries of the civil law in the country, and if you have issues in your research, then these will have to be a decision about the what will happen would have to be made by a court. So if we now look at some scenarios about which have both good and bad ethical and legal practice in them, we'll be able to see these issues in more detail. So scenario 1 says a researcher is looking at the effects of ice baths after performing exercise. He goes into gymnastics having asked to do research on a 12-year-old female gymnast after a gymnastics training session. He gets parental consent, he does a risk assessment and a PARQ before doing the study, but during the experiment, the female gymnast is left alone in the ice bath for 5 minutes. And after that 5 minutes, she decides that she doesn't want to take part in the study anymore. However, the researcher does not let her withdraw from the study because he says that he's nearly finished and he wants to carry on. So in this scenario, some of the good practice points include the researcher getting parental consent from the gymnast parents, because due to her being under the age of 18, she is legally unable to give consent, and so the researcher had to get it from her parents or carers. He also did a risk assessment and a PARQ before, meaning that he checked for any potential risks that could have occurred during the test, and then the PRQ allowed him to find out more about the girl's health condition and her lifestyle. However, there are also some things that are bad practice in this scenario, such as the fact that the girl wasn't allowed to withdraw from the study. So the researcher did not allow the gymnast to withdraw because he said that he was near the end. However, the BASIS Code of Conduct states that any participant has the right to withdraw at any point during the study, even after it's finished. So, as well as this, the gymnast was under no supervision while she was in the ice bath, meaning that if something had gone wrong, then there was no one there that could have attended to her, meaning that the study in general lacked any sort of protection from harm for the gymnast. So, in order to make sure that these ethical issues don't occur, the researcher must make sure that he allows the participants to withdraw from the study at any time, even if he is close to finishing the study. It's important that the participants understand that it is their right to withdraw, and if they feel under any sort of pressure or suffer from any sort of harm, whether that be physical, psychological, or social harm, they have the right to withdraw. And that even applies after the study is finished. So if after this study had finished, the gymnast had decided, I don't want to take part anymore, I don't want my results to be published, then they have that right, and the researcher cannot argue against that. If the study had some of these, if this study was real and it had these issues, then some of the consequences that the researcher might face include being sued, losing their accreditation by BASIS, getting suspended from their role as a researcher, and even major consequences such as prison sentences, because if anything major had happened to that gymnast while she was in that ice bath, for example, unconscious or her even dying, then he would face a prison sentence because of that. So looking at another scenario, which is about a researcher wanting to test a new drug and whether it could increase the time it takes for lactic acid to take effect. And so he goes into a gymnastics club for young gymnasts, and he wants to basically see if the drug will have any effect. And again, like the previous one, there are things that are good about this study and also some things that are bad. So the researcher, along with the coaching staff, they supervise the gymnast during the experiment. So unlike the last one, they have to supervise the gymnast because they're under the age of 18. And so it's important that because of their age, there is someone supervising them in case something does go wrong. However, in this scenario, there are many things that are bad practice. So the first thing, that he doesn't get consent from the gymnast parents. Asking the coach for consent isn't acceptable, as the coach isn't responsible for all of the children and the gymnasts. And so the researcher should have asked the gymnast parents or carers, due to them not being able to give their own consent because of their age. As well as this, the researcher didn't allow all of the participants to withdraw because he needed a certain amount of subjects so that he could make conclusions from his study. And this is again ethically wrong, as all participants must have the right to withdraw from the study if they want to. And this is also showing researcher bias or inequality, as he's allowing some gymnasts to withdraw, but not all of them.